I almost don't like the term boudoir. I've talked about this before, I think in like blog posts and other podcasts and things. It's really more of like an intimate portraiture. I'm sure many people who are listening have heard that term as well. Try putting that on a business card or on your website, though. It's really difficult. And also explaining that. That's more of an explanation than like, oh, I photograph boudoir.
Hello, and welcome to the Studio Takeover podcast. I am your host and mentor, Kat Ford Coates. Today, I am joined by none other than Shannon K Dougherty out of St. Louis. Shannon, welcome.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here.
You guys, so Shannon is one of my absolute favorite people and closest friends. And I just love that we could actually both find time in our schedules to be like, yes, let's do podcast stuff.
And make sure that we look presentable at the same time.
Yes. Well, I'm halfway there. You know, this morning I was kind of in like a homeless poodle situation, but we've calmed it down a little bit.
That's why, well, one, I wear headphones so I can hear better, but two, it kind of tames any poofiness that is happening with the wild hair that happens, especially when it's, busy season and you're like, run a comb through my hair. I don't think so.
Well, why don't you actually kind of tell us about who you are, what you shoot, and yeah, we can kind of take it from there.
It's so funny. It's like always being asked that question, like, tell us who you are about yourself. And then we just forget everything about ourselves the second that happens, right?
Right.
Well, I'm Shannon. I am based in St. Louis, Missouri. I shoot boudoir with a lot of fashion editorial vibes to it. Always trying to think of the best way to say that. I don't think that boudoir has to be conformed into a box, that it has to be just lingerie, that it has to be with just a bed, that it has to be with certain posing. I think that there's a lot of influence you can add from the portrait world, even the wedding world. I love shooting like bridal stuff too, and adding that influence into what I consider boudoir.
Well, it's funny in my members group, somebody was asking, like, are you planning any boudoir posing, for the mentor program? And I was like, boudoir is not really even on deck until, like May of 24. But talk me through, what it is you're struggling with. And she's a portrait photographer. And she's like, the composition and the posing, it just feels really off. And you actually immediately came to mind because, like I'll ask mentees questions like, what do you want it to feel like? What do you want the person to feel like when you're photographing them? Is there a specific way you approach your posing, or is it really like very mapped out and methodical?
I wish I could say that it was a lot of pre-planned stuff, but I think a lot of it is just over time and really seeing where my passion lied with it. I think that there's so many photographers that are so good at doing boudoir with certain posing and doing booty shots and things like that. I'm not. I'm not good at that. I think when I was shooting that way many, many, many years ago, I wasn't feeling passionate about it. Like I knew I liked working with my clients. I knew I liked boudoir. There was a lot of aspects I liked, but I was like, I don't feel like this is me, like posing this way. So I really kind of took a step back. I didn't really shoot boudoir for a little while. I really stuck more with portrait. I did some commercial work and things like that. And I was like, I really feel more comfortable with having a blend because not only does it give more options to your clients to come in for a boudoir shoot, and now they have nice portraits of them too. Sure. And then they have more intimate images as well, and to me, it's more about my client's comfort level than anything else. Pro naked, run around, do whatever you want as I am. I know I'm not personally that kind of person. So I would feel a little uncomfortable going in for a shoot like that for myself. But if I saw somebody's work and I was like, oh, they do have a nice mix of lingerie and portrait, then I would feel more comfortable that way. So probably like a lot of us, when I started my business, I was kind of thinking, what would I want when hiring somebody too? So no, I would love to say like, oh yeah, I have this whole mapped out thing. It's really just per person. And, it just ends up working out and kind of fitting with, when they reach out to us, they're seeing our work and, they're like, oh, I love this. When I'm doing my consultation with my clients, I'm like, what about my work stood out to you? What made you reach out? A little bit of one, finding out about them, and two, finding out what about what I post or share made them think, oh yeah, I need to reach out to her to have that for
Want this
myself.
for myself.
Yeah.
One of the things, like when it comes to posing specifically, the way that I teach is really like, I let them exist in their body and then just sort of tweak from there. Now, that's not to say I don't, have like poses that I know, like, okay, these really do sell very well. But, especially in boudoir, like portrait, yes, is a vulnerable space. But when you sort of take it into the intimate aspects of boudoir photography, it's even more of a vulnerable space for people. Unless they are the, I don't care, take all my clothes off, run down the street, that's a thing.
But I think even with those clientele, I still, everybody's nervous. The second you put a camera on someone, there tends to be, no matter how often you're on camera, I feel like even if there's like 3 seconds of nerves, it's still like, whoo, this is new. And I think even clients I've had that are like, yes, the naked run down the street kind, it does take a second. It's a whole other space than like, I'm at home, I don't care, I'll sign for UPS package like this. When it's like, it's just you, it's just your photographer, it's just the camera. And it's more, so I'm just more of a quiet person in general, but like my setting when I'm shooting is the same way. It's like very quiet. There's music playing, but it's not anything like, I'm not the photographer holding the camera like, yeah. I'm more like, this is like softer, more intimate and things like that. And I think there is a difference between that. And sometimes I'll even have clients that are a little bit more on the conservative side that are like, you know what, let's just do it. Let's just go for it. I'm already here. And there's a difference between feeling like, oh, I'm nude on camera and like, oh, I'm actually with my body right now.
Because you can always kind of tell when somebody's like being performative with it versus like, oh, I'm actually going to listen and be aware of my surroundings, right? But also follow that direction and just see where those natural movements occur and be present with themselves. Because I think that really is where the transformation lies.
One thing I see common too in like groups too is like, how do I pose for this? And of course, there should be some basics on posing. Right. But I'm the same way. I like to see how my client moves in their body and then little things that might tweak too. And if I'm photographing something that maybe is a different kind of angle and I can see what I always say to my clients, like if I see a question mark come over your head, and you know what that is, that question mark on someone's face that happens, that stare of like, what is she doing? I will show them the back of the camera too, or I'm like, yes, this feels weird, but let me show you. And the fear that happens when I'm like, let me see how you move first. Now I do pose, of course, and that's how I start. But I'm like, let me see how your body naturally moves. Let me see where you would naturally place your hand. And if there's anything that I want to tweak from there, I will. And obviously the trust happens more as we're going through the shoot too, where they're like, oh, I already know what she's going to do. I know what she's going to ask. Because I try not to bog somebody down with, oh yeah, we're going to have a list of like 20, 25 poses we're going to do. I'm like, no. We're going to do little variations. We're going to do little movements. I'm going to move around, but I want to see how you interact with your own body.
I'm curious, is there any like unpopular opinions that you work with that you're like, actually, that works really well for me? I only ask because in the boudoir space specifically, I feel like there's a lot of judgment and it has to be done this way. And like, of course, safety is a thing, hands down. At the same time, like, I feel like the things that work, like, oh, this will be great for your boudoir shoot. And then you're like, maybe not. But this thing that you harp on that like really, that works really well for me.
Probably the most common thing is what I do is not boudoir to a lot of people. And it's so weird. It's very split. It's very 50-50. One, I've just never been the person of like, put me in a box. Yes, I'm only this. I don't know. I'm the third child. I'm the wild card of the family. But, for some, it's like, well, you're not really shooting just lingerie. You're not shooting these particular poses. Is that actually boudoir? Or is it boudoir if someone's wearing a dress? And I don't see why not. It's not so much of what someone's wearing per se. It's how I'm also photographing them and how they're like kind of coming across as I'm photographing them as well. If somebody walks in with a blazer and they're sitting up high and they put their hands up, as we've been talking about for like a headshot, yeah, that's going to be more of a headshot. But what if I move their hands and I have the blazer come off their shoulder and I have them having a certain expression? There's no reason to me that that's not boudoir, because that's an intimate feeling. I almost don't like the term boudoir. I've talked about this before, I think in like blog posts and other podcasts and things. It's really more of like an intimate portraiture. I'm sure many people who are listening have heard that term as well. Try putting that on a business card or on your website, though. It's really difficult. And also explaining that. That's more of an explanation than like, oh, I photograph boudoir. Right.
Right.
I would say that's probably the number one thing I run into. It's not even posing per se that someone's, that I have comments about. It's more like, is that actually boudoir? And I'm like, well, sure. Why not? Let me explain to you why.
When I very, very, very first started in photography, I was very drawn to boudoir and then just assumed that I had to shoot weddings because that's where the money was. But then like boudoir sessions happened and so on and so forth. But it was much more traditional boudoir.
Sure.
Right. And I remember looking at it and like seeing the impact it was having for the women. They were celebrating themselves and it was really exciting for them and all of the things. But I was like, there's something missing out of this, which I assumed was my skill sets in the tech side. But I think what it was missing was the intimacy. Then I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to, work on engagement sessions, right? And portrait sessions if they wanted to couple with my wedding packages and kind of work it that way. And the more portrait sessions that I photographed, even in a branding setting, like I remember photographing these ladies that worked at a spa. And half of them were like, can we do some spicy ones? And it was like, oh, there was like this, well, I know we're already signed up for this thing over here, but can we also do? And that's when I really started bringing like variety into the session so that people could have like the best of all the worlds. Do you find that people are calling you specifically for boudoir, or they're sort of justifying a session in another way and then being like, by the by?
So when I have my form on my website that people fill out, it's a very short kind of questionnaire. I don't like to read through a bunch of it until I'm actually speaking to a client, because I think sometimes people don't know exactly what they want when they're reaching out. That's why I like to speak with them more one-on-one. But yeah, I have the option. You can reach out and it's personal branding, portrait or boudoir. And I get a mix of people clicking on, I'll even just take personal branding out of that because that's not really what we're talking about, but I get a mix of kind of both of them. And then once I speak to people, I'm like, oh, okay, they're actually looking for a little more of this. I would say probably 99% of my clients do a mix of like more portrait and boudoir together. And it's not just one or the other. Because once I have that conversation with them, I'm like, you don't have to wear lingerie. You can just, and I have an extensive studio wardrobe as well. But like, if you want to bring in a couple pieces, you can. And sometimes I would say most of my clients bring in some form of a lingerie set of their own because they're like, hey, I kind of want to try this. And I'm like, well, that's always an option for me anyway. I don't walk into it like, unless again, it's personal branding or headshots. Those are obviously very different. If somebody walks in and they're like, well, I know I'm booked for portrait, but can we try this? There's no reason why not for me. I'm like, we're here. Like, we're already getting comfortable. Like I sit with them besides the consultation and everything, I sit with them during hair and makeup too, and getting to know them better. And sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, like they really want to do this. They don't know how to ask for it. Or they're so worried it's going to look one way. And obviously, again, people look at our work, hopefully, when they book us and they can see like, oh, okay, like this is what her work looks like. But I think over the years, just my personal opinion, I think people have been scared of the word boudoir because they're worried it's going to be something that they don't want or something they're going to be thrown into an uncomfortable situation. And I don't take that as somebody who doesn't trust me or anything. It's just what we've seen out there. Or maybe their friend had a boudoir shoot for their bridal, right? Like, I feel like that's where a lot of people start is like, oh, it's a gift the bride gives the husband or the future husband. And they're like, well, that's not really what I want. That's not really what I'm comfortable with. And so I think sometimes I get this little like, do you mind if we I brought this little lingerie set. They bring one little bag and it's like in this tiny little bag. I'm like, of course, if you want to use that. And half the time they end up using pieces from my wardrobe.
Mhm.
Maybe we layer them a little bit different than like, here's a bra and panty set. It's whatever someone's comfortable with.
Well, and the way that you style too, and I appreciate like the comfort level of what the client has. But one of the things, especially like because you do have a lot of editorial influence, but is the way that you layer in your styling, right? Like there was really popular, it was one of those like big pearl, it's almost like a shawl.
That like necklace thing.
And I've got one. Yeah, it's actually hanging off of a mannequin right now, but it's always driven me nuts. I'm like, how can I adjust this thing without breaking it? And then like you went and posted something one day and I was just like, damn it, Shannon.
Actually, I'm due to post that one on my Instagram. I did post it on my stories. But no, I'm the same way with that piece. I hate that piece. If anybody's listening and they know exactly what piece we're talking about, it's that like pearl collar and it goes on to like the chest and it's like drapey. And I've seen some people style the thing as it is beautifully. I'm like, how did you do that? Because the second I look at that thing, it just like, that thing bogs my mind. I hated that piece. Like, how did it end up in my wardrobe? I have no idea. It's like probably one of those, like, I'm buying a list of things for my studio wardrobe, throw it in the cart kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah. And so sometimes one, it's just my thrifty mind too, where I grew up, kind of thrifting and things where I'm like, before I get rid of this piece, I guess inevitably I felt like I was going to. Let me restyle it. Let me repurpose it. Let me change some wires around. Let me move this thing and see if I can make it into something I love. And sometimes I'll do that even if somebody brings something in, as long as I'm not like ripping it up or anything.
Sure.
I'm like, can we restyle this to not be, hey, it's a slip or it's a lingerie piece or it's a robe. Can we make the robe into a dress somehow? Like, let's change it up.
Put a corset on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, can we just change it a little bit? Because sometimes in my own mind too, selfishly, I'm probably thinking, I'm kind of bored with shooting just this. Can I change it? And then as long as the client loves it, which again, I'm very lucky. Normally they do. It's kind of to help us too, because it's like kind of going back to the same thing I talked about earlier. Like I don't really do a shoot list because I would get bored.
So bored.
I've done that in the past where it's like when you're first starting, I'm like, okay, I have to know my posing and all that. And I was like, felt so restricted that I'm like, I have to be free as a bird when I'm photographing. And that comes down to styling too. I'm like, I don't want to feel like, I like to have an idea, but I don't want to feel like, well, it has to be this, it has to be that. Like, so I probably just went off on a tangent.
Well, and I think when you are starting, like having a game plan is a good idea.
Oh, right? I agree.
Because as soon as you lift a camera up, everything goes out the window when you're starting.
Yeah. Right from left. Don't know it.
Yeah. Forget it. And that doesn't mean like you can't stray from the path. Like, of course you can. Sure. But as you build that into muscle memory and the process that you create, right? Like, okay, seated, standing, laying down, like the 1, 2, 3 of it really kind of becomes second nature, which gives you the capacity and the bandwidth to even have the ability to play elsewhere. And I remember like way back in the day, I would get so frustrated because everything goes out the window. Right. And then I would overshoot like a crazy person because you're trying to fill the silence and you don't know what to say. So you're just like, I'm just going to keep shooting. And then you have like 800 frames of the same exact thing. And the client's like, what's happening?
Yeah. How long am I holding this for?
Yeah. Like, so having that game plan is a good idea. But the fun part comes like when you have the fundamental piece down, because that gives you the energy to kind of like, oh, let's see what this would look like, or let's try this way. And if you're selling by the image anyway, like if they don't like it, they don't have to buy it.
I like to do that with every client. Is I have my basic idea of what I'm going to shoot, like a variation of something. And then I always do like the little fun one where I'm like, do you care if I try this? Typically that is something that a client will buy as well. Even if I shoot 10 frames of it, I save maybe 2 to show them for their viewing session. a lot of times they're like, oh, that was fun. Oh, you know what? That was kind of fun how you styled that. Or I wasn't sure how that was going to look. That's a really common one too. Probably most of us here, like, oh, I wasn't sure how that was going to look. Because a lot of times if I'm playing with something, I guess I quote unquote weird, I don't show them the back of the camera. I wait till it's the viewing session to show them. So that way they kind of have that excitement of like, oh, I remember doing that. I thought that seemed so weird.
Yeah, something unexpected. I really love incorporating unexpected things. And I'll do that through tech. I'll do that through styling.
Yeah.
You know, and I've had like total failures on that too. Like,
oh, sure. I'm like, I just delete them.
well, I have, because my image selections, I show them everything, right?
Okay.
So they see like blinks out of focus, because that really does help them appreciate when something is like executed well. They're like, oh, now I see. And I have this one client, she comes probably every like 2.5 years. And her style is just like so contemporary, and like she's definitely got an edge to it. Like she's in her, I think, late 40s, early 50s, teenage daughters, that kind of thing. But she's got like librarian meets McQueen, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just this very cool vibe. And she was like, no, like, let's do something like totally out of the box. And she had brought like 4,000 outfits. And she's like, but I want to wear something from your wardrobe. And like, my wardrobe is like pretty feminine and all over the place. But a lot of like her style is very like conservative with an edge, which is not really like, some of it has some edge to it. We've got some leather pieces, some studded pieces. But everything else is like extremely feminine. Like we put something together, and when we went and did the viewing, she was like, that's a bummer. It didn't work. I don't love it. And I was like, okay. Right. And so those images don't see the light of day. But at the same time, it was like, man, I thought it was really good.
And I mean, like, that's probably the secret photographer thing too, is if I'm starting to photograph something and I'm like, oh, I'm not really loving it, I actually just move on. I'm probably to a fault honest with my clients. I'm like, you know what? This isn't working out the way I thought it would. Why don't we just change it up a little bit? I will call myself out all day long, like leaving a lens cap on.
Oh, yeah.
Not having my light come on. Little things like that. But I mean, if I'm, like I said, if I styled something and I'm like, this isn't really working the way I wanted it to, why don't we switch it up? You know, I don't have it happen as common now with better camera equipment for certain things, but sometimes I would be out of focus. I'm like, well, that one's out of focus. Whoops. And so obviously we shoot again. But I think that also little things like that lighten the mood, even though like my shoots obviously look a little bit more serious. I'm like, we're actually having a lot of fun behind the scenes, and kind of easing the client where it's not like, you know, I don't think I'm an intimidating person, but you know, someone's walking in, they don't really know you, and you are this expert that they see, which of course we are, but it's like, yeah, you know, we leave a lens cap on, or that's out of focus. So it's like every single person has dealt with an out of focus photo. Like, it's okay. Like, just show humanity with it and be like, yeah, I'm a person too. We're going to have a good day. You're going to come out with beautiful images. But yeah, half the time I trip on things. You're going to look great. I'm going to look like complete trash behind the scenes, but it doesn't matter. It's not about me. It's about you. So, you know.
Well, speaking of failures, like, is there at any point, because you're quite well established in St. Louis, but there had to be a time where like something occurred either with a client or with part of your process that you really just like, man, I can't believe this happened. This really sucks while I'm in it. Like, but I know like on the other side of it, like getting through it is the answer.
No matter how many years you've been doing this, there's always going to be a hard decision that comes up. And for me, it was having to let a client go that just wasn't a good fit. And that, as an empathetic person who feels all the feels, that was really, really difficult because one, I don't want to disappoint the client. But I have to stick to my boundaries. I'm very good at sticking to my boundaries. It's harder sometimes to stick to our boundaries when we feel like we're disappointing someone, you know, and going through a conversation, I just realized more and more, I'm like, I don't know if I'm the correct fit for this person because I don't know if I can help them with the journey that they're going on. Maybe in the future I could have, but right now I didn't see it being the proper fit. And this is like after consultation, this is after all of the things, and I'm like, I had to, even talking about it, I feel, because it's so fresh too. I've had it happen only a couple times in my career. I'm very lucky. But sometimes it's like knowing when to be like, I don't know if I can give this person what they need. I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to take time out of my day if I feel like I've already failed. I think that sometimes we've walked into a session feeling that way. It's a hard emotion to get out, right? Like, again, I feel like even emotional talking about it, but knowing when to kind of be like, as much as we feel like we want to be able to service every person that reaches out, like, a lot of my clients are mostly women, and this like, oh, it's this empowering thing. And like, they get to be glam and all that. I'm like, I don't know if I was the right fit for this particular client at this time, because there was just, obviously I'm not going to go into personal details or anything, but there was just a lot of stuff that I was like, I feel like I'm already failing because I haven't even gotten to the shoot. And again, I want them to like walk into whoever they go to and feel like, yeah, I'm excited. This is the thing for me, and not feel like I would have felt like extra on edge.
Yeah. When you haven't even gotten to the shoot yet. Right. And whether it's, communicative issues or whatever, like if you already feel like you're failing, right, that does not set you up for success.
Yeah.
That isn't to say like anytime you feel, like when somebody says you're too expensive or whatever, for anybody listening, feeling like you're failing in the service department, right, with how you're delivering communication and education. And somebody's giving you a lot of pushback in any which way, that is a red flag in my world for sure. Because the other side of that is, say you get to the shoot and maybe the shoot goes great, and then you get to the viewing and everything else crumbles again. Yeah. And they're like, the immediate knee-jerk reaction for anybody in that situation is going to be like, I should have known from that first la. And the same is true for us as business owners. Like, you have to keep in mind, like, when you feel those red flags come up internally, like, it's okay to say no, not fall into the people pleasing modality of like, well, I don't want to disappoint her, so I'll say yes. And I want the business, right? Instead of I want to work with this person. It's a good rule of thumb to follow for your own personal experience. And I'm really proud of you for being like, you know what? Like, I just don't think this is going to be a good fit.
I think that feeling, at least for myself personally, it took years to be like, you know what, like taking business out of it as far as like a number or another client on the books, filling a seat or anything. I don't want to fail a client, if that makes sense. Sure. I don't want them to walk in and feel like, it's a fix all. It helps, yes, but it's not going to all of a sudden every cloud has parted, right? Like we do a version of that, but and there was just, as communication was going, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to help this client the way I think she wants to be helped. There might be somebody better off with her with that. And I have a lot of confidence in what I do, but again, it was just one of those, again, you're saying red flags. It was one of those things where I'm like, I don't think that this is going to work out. And also too, it's like, I think a lot of how our personal lives are going too sometimes, where it's like, how does this feel for my own boundaries and my own life to feel like taking on something that feels so heavy at the same time?
When you bring it into the space about our personal lives, we think that we're supposed to be almost robotic in the space of like filling the seat and getting the calendar full. And because our businesses do have to generate revenue, but when something's out of alignment and you can feel it, right? And it feels very similar to self-doubt. And so being able to delineate between the two, to really understand, like, is this me being kind of unsure of myself, or is this really not a situation that I need to be involved in?
Sure.
Right. And if your goal is to make sure that the client has a successful experience with you, right, then being able to appreciate what that success looks like. Like, so you do have to know what your non-negotiables are too, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. And that definitely comes with time.
Mhm.
Can't say it ever gets easier to be like, oh, sorry, I don't think that this is going to work. But I think that, there's a lot of things in our business that we decide too, like certain systems we're doing, or like maybe that's not working anymore. Maybe I need to change that. And I think that that's kind of no different. As much as I'd love to have every single person reach out to me, get on our books, it's not always going to be viable. It's not always going to be the right fit. Maybe somebody wants a lot of things that I just can't do for them, or maybe I don't do in my business. So I guess bless and release is the best way to say it,
When you're navigating building your systems, and by your systems, I mean your business, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you're navigating that, because I remember being in the space, like I'll take 12 sessions a month on separate days. Like I just want to be shooting all the time. And then realizing just how, like what that looks like. We ran a campaign, and I don't know, I think I talked about this on one of the first episodes, but we created a campaign called Woman Unforgettable during COVID. Because at the beginning of COVID, I was like, wow, I can calm down now, right? And I just ended up really drinking tequila in my backyard. But by May, I was like, oh, this is way more serious than I gave it credit for.
Yes.
And it was like, it started getting really heartbreaking. And then by the end of May, I was like, wait, if this becomes indefinite, I don't know if the business will survive. Like as a people, right? Like I knew eventually solutions would arise from the powers that be. But it was, okay, we can swing on savings through maybe like the fall. So in June, I was like, all right, we're going to need to set up a campaign and figure out how we can go back to work, like safely. And, so I started doing all of this research, and a friend of mine, he was working with a company that subcontracted from Moderna. So he had like firsthand access to not just like CDC recommendations, but like all of this stuff. And so we created a process that people could go through where, we would all stay masked and shielded and like all of this stuff. But I ended up, between my associate photographer and I, we photographed, I can't remember if it was 42 or 46 people over the course of like 5 weeks. And that was full sessions. My associate, like they photographed 12 of them, and I took on the lion's share of the rest. That was when I first really discovered like, oh, okay, if I'm going to be doing campaigns like this, I really need to stack people. Well, if I need to stack people, that means I need to get faster. And I was already pretty fast at that point, but not like 12 people back to back fast. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I still wanted to be able to provide like a really incredible experience. It would just be a little more high energy overall, because you've got people in all over the place, but also keep it safe. But that's really where I discovered a lot of my non-negotiables around like rescheduling and cancellation. What kind of communication will I engage in? Right. So often you hear from photographers like, I can't believe she texted me. It was 1:30 in the morning. And I was like, why is your phone on at 1:30 in the morning? You set your boundaries. So instead of resenting people for crossing them when you haven't set them, let alone enforce them, and set yourself up to be able to have it as a boundary in the first place.
Feeling like, okay, I need to stick to my boundaries with this situation. But, I was the person too. I was like, I guess I'll reply to this email at 3:00, which of course my therapist was like, stop it. I'll get it. I would occasionally have a client text me at like 11:30 at night, and I'm awake, but I'm not answering your text at 11:30. And it's like putting those boundaries. I don't usually prefer clients to text me. I'm like, if it's an absolute, you need something, please text me. And I would say most clients are like, yeah, sure, no problem. I have them call or text me when they arrive at the studio so I can let them in. But, I'm like email. I was like anything communication, email. I was like, one, it's all there for me. I don't lose it in a text message because, obviously other people are texting us. And two, like, I'm not going, if you send me a text or anything, I'm probably going to email you back because, again, that's where I prefer my communication to be. And there's a lot of like, you don't have to be rude with boundaries. I'm just like, hey, email is best. Or call me and leave me a voicemail. Most people are afraid to get on the phone. So email it is typically.
Yeah.
Certain things I do like to have that, written, like certain things with sessions and stuff. I like to have it written in an email and not a text message. But I mean, that took a lot of time. Again, as somebody who has empathy, which therapy has helped me balance my empathy out of being like, everything is like, oh, well, let me help. Let me help. I do want to help, but let's talk about, is somebody taking advantage? What is my boundary as far as time, my energy? Like, I do not pick up my camera on Saturdays. That's a boundary I made for myself. Will not pick up my camera on a Saturday. So I need to miss her for a day. I do creative shoots on Sundays. If I book one, I try to do Sundays, and I only photograph my clients Monday through Friday. We typically start at the same time every time, unless it's something comes up. Hey, can we start like a little earlier? Sure. No, not a big deal. Don't usually start later than that time because it messes up my flow of my day. And I have staff, I have makeup artists who have to get to another job and things like that.
Right.
And there's a lot of stuff. It's like the second you really, really stick to that, it's like amazing how much relief that feels. There's always going to be somebody who is going to ask maybe, can we change this? Can we do this? Can we do this day instead? And if it's beyond what you want to do, it's okay to say no. The only time I really change that is like, if we have like one year we had snowstorms like crazy in like February. I had to reschedule like my whole February because it was like my most popular day is Thursdays, and every single Thursday there was a snowstorm. And so I had to shoot on Sundays. I had to make it up somehow, but I'm like, that's okay. Right. Because that was an act of God. There was things that happened, but I love sticking to my boundaries as much as it sucks at times. I'm like, no, this is my business. People will respect you for being like, oh, okay. It's like everybody else has business hours, like Target, all of that, they close their doors at a certain time. There's no reason why we shouldn't either.
Yeah. And gosh, you said a lot there. Well, no, like a lot of, like boundaries don't have to be some really aggressive, like, screw you. No, it can just simply be like, I'm not available for that. And boundaries for yourself, right? I am still a human being. I still have a life that I would like to live. And it doesn't have to be a long-winded answer for no, too. Like, no is a complete sentence.
Well, that's the nice thing, too, is about being a business owner, whether it's solely what you do or if you work another job too, everything has a schedule and you can make that schedule, especially if you're working a day job. You probably don't necessarily want to shoot every night, right? You want time with your family, you want time off, you want to be able to catch up on a Netflix show or whatever it is. And it's like, that's kind of the beauty of being a business owner, is you can make your own hours. On the flip side, obviously, we know that we don't always stick to those hours. Yeah, but,
it's funny, when I was in bartending, I always used to call people with day jobs day walkers because, like you get off, well, you close the bar at 2, you get out at 4, you come home, you wind down, you have a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey. Next thing you know, it's 6 a.m. Yeah. Right. And it's time to go to bed. And, while the roommates are like, okay, got to go to work. I was like, whatever, day walkers. And I swear to you, the second that I closed the brewery, immediately I'm a day walker now. So I'm sure I was purely jealous. And
well, I'm the same way. I mean, we've talked about that bond that we have. Is I worked as a bartender for 10 years, and the tail end of the last couple of years, because I actually was still working on my business full time and working this job at night. I was a night owl and an early worm. Yep. And it was hard. It was like, I mean, I used to be able to thrive on like, oh, I got like 4 hours of sleep, but it's so hard to like wind down at the end of the night. And then again, I was shooting differently then too, but I was like, I'm not giving myself or my clients the proper attention here. So even as much as it might be a creative brain where it's 3:00 and I should go write some ideas down, I'm like, I'm going to go back to bed because there's no point of me being up right now.
Yeah, no. And it's funny too, because I get up now and it's between like 4:30 and 5:30 typically.
That's crazy to me though.
Well, I mean, but I also go to sleep really early too. Like,
what's early?
I'll watch like Wheel of Fortune. I go super old lady mode. I'll go Wheel of Fortune and then cruise with Brooklyn Nine-Nine for like 2 or 3 hours. Rest in peace, Under Brower. And then I'm asleep by like 9, if not 8.
Okay. I still feel like that's okay. All right.
Right. So, but like if I'm waking up at 5:30, I'm stirring by 4:30. But there are some
Yeah.
mornings I'm just like, I guess I'm up. Okay.
Yeah. But I have those mornings, I'm like, I guess I'll just get up because if I go back to sleep, I'm like, forget it. I don't want to do anything today. Luckily, that doesn't happen too much on days I have clients, though. Like, I feel like I usually get a pretty good night's sleep. And again, that's kind of, that could go back to boundaries too, where I'm not nervous. I'm excited. I'm excited to
Yeah.
be with my clients. So I tend to sleep like, okay, sometimes I'm excited just for my ideas that I want to photograph that day.
Well, and understanding like that you needed the boundary for yourself, right? Because you're not giving your clients your best when you're not taking care of yourself.
Yeah. And
Right.
my other relationships too, like friendships, romantic relationships, family, things like that. Even if I don't get to see people a lot, I'm like, okay, I realize that I am as obsessed as we are with our businesses. I'm like, oh, I need to take a step back and actually be like, okay, even if I'm going shopping at Target with my mom or something like that, I'm like, I need to give these relationships more time because one, not in a morbid sense, but we only have so much time on this planet where it's like, yes, I'm obsessed with my business and things like that, but I also need to give time to those relationships because, every day is another day.
Mm-hmm.
And, people won't always be with us. Again, I don't mean that in a morbid sense, but it's like, again, I worked as a bartender for 10 years where many of my nights were taken. And then during the day, if I was not photographing a client, I was really tired. I didn't want to do anything. And I'm naturally just a loner anyway. So I'm fine on my own. But like, I would say no to things I even wanted to do because I was just so tired or I had to work on this business thing where my brain works best with a schedule anyway. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to schedule that into my day. And it's going to be not tomorrow when I'm hanging out with people. It's going to be on like Tuesday or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to get it done.
You're not just missing out on whatever because you're working Fridays and Saturdays, right? Like in my world, if it's like you're missing, like, because all of the good shifts, right, were maybe like Sunday, Monday, Thursday. Actually, Thursdays were always terrible. Tuesday, Friday, Saturday. But that included holidays. So like,
Yeah.
I didn't go home for Thanksgiving or for Christmas for a decade, right? I could pop in like maybe a week after New Year, something like that. But, there was a good solid decade where it was like, here's Kat. And it doesn't have to be that way when you own your business. Like you don't start a business to create just another job you could do for somebody else. But Shannon, thank you so much for meeting with me today. Where can people find you online?
I keep it pretty simple as far as social media goes. I'm mostly on Instagram. So it is Instagram.com/Shannon_K_Dougherty. And my website is ShannonKDougherty.com. Those would probably be the best ways to reach me. And if you want to book a shoot with me as well, I photograph many other photographers. There's a link on there to fill out that form. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I love you dearly.
Thank you. Love you.